It is beyond a pleasure to see each of you today. My name is Andrew Zwicker. I have the distinct honor of being the host of this Science on Saturday lecture series. I've been the host since 2014. And as some of you know, we've named it after a former host, a beloved member of the PPPL community who passed away unexpectedly back in 2014, Ron Hatcher, who was an engineer here, an electrical engineer, who helped to design some of the fusion experiments that are at this laboratory. And so I get the pleasure of not just hosting this, but in honoring Ron, Ronnie was just a remarkable person and a remarkable engineer. Oh, I would tell you, we missed you, but I missed you terribly. All right. To be surrounded by a science-loving, nope, too fast. To be surrounded by people who love science on a cold Saturday. We were just talking about it's 7 degrees, maybe it's up to 10 degrees right now, is so good, right? It was March, I know exactly. It was March 12th, 2020, when we shut down the laboratory. We were the first national laboratory in the country to say, that's it. It's time to go to fully remote. We had no idea what Zoom was. We had no idea what was going on. We had no idea what the next 3 years were going to entail. And now Zoom is a part of our everyday lives. We have dozens of people from not just around New Jersey, but around the country and around the world who are watching this lecture right now and are joining us, have become part of the Science on Saturday family. It's just utter delight. So I got to ask, show of hands of people who are here right now. How many people are here for the first time? Both wonderful, and I don't know if you can see that on Zoom because it's probably looking at us right now, but very few people put their hand up. So I got to ask, how many people have been here not for the first time? All right. So hold on, leave your hands up. Leave your hands up. First time you came here, this is 2023. First time you came here was after 2020. So you've been here since 2020, right? First time you came here was 2010 or later. First time you came here was 2000. Some hands are still up. Anybody from the 1990s? I love it. Wait, oh, TK. Wait, hold on, hang on. I'm not done. 1980s? TK? Oh, you're here at the lab for Science on Saturday. TK joined the laboratory in 1964. All right, just crazy. It's just wonderful that we're all back. What a difficult few years it's been. And if you don't know this already, this is the first public event that the Plasma Physics Laboratory has held in 3 years. And it was that important. We worked so hard to get us here. I really am so thrilled. So with that, a few housekeeping rules and let's get to the lecture. So a couple things, just so you know, right? Masks are optional. Today? It could change. So what PPL does is we monitor local health conditions, and depending upon what's going on, it's not just for you, it's for all of us. Masks are optional now. If things change, we'll put it on the website. We'll let you know. What we simply ask is make sure you have a mask in your pocket just in case, and we have extra masks. We also have, there are some people in the cafeteria who have come but are going to sit in the cafeteria. No problem. Your choice. Thank you for your patience. Clearly, we're going through some of the technical things. Overflow participants will be asked to view the lecture in the cafeteria, but you have that choice no matter what. For those of you here for the first time, we ask that you hold the questions until the end of the lecture, and then we'll have people going up and down with microphones because we want to make sure that everyone in the auditorium can hear, everyone in the cafeteria can hear, and everybody online can hear. And so just wait on a microphone and we'll call on you. For all our folks on Zoom, can't see you right now, but please make sure your microphone is set to mute. Hold your questions as well. And if you use the raise hand function, what I'm going to try to do is figure out how to go back and forth between questions that are here and questions that are online. We are recording the talks and they'll be available on our website. So for those of you who are here, you already know But for those of you who are Zoom, I'm going to continue to tempt you. Next slide. There we go. I hope you enjoyed the bagels. Hope you enjoyed the coffee. I saw very little left. I see some people still eating. So, part of Science on Saturday is a chance to come together and to enjoy the coffee and the bagels. So thank you. Go ahead, Harry. Next slide. A few people I want to thank. So our AV folks, Harry is in the back right now. Go ahead. Harry and Anthony are both from the AV department. So can we give them a round of applause for figuring this out? Back a slide, Harry. And then Dee Ortiz, who is right in the back right here, who's organized the whole thing. If we give her a round of applause. Okay, and now, next slide. There we go. Some people have noticed, I did shorten the number of lectures this year. I did that on purpose, one, to get us a little bit away from the holiday season to make sure the COVID rate wasn't so high. And then also, just because we were getting this off the ground, want to make sure we were going smoothly. But there are the 6 talks that we have, a wonderful, wonderful diversity of science and people. I cannot wait, but it's time for the first talk. So if we go to the last slide. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome for 2023, Professor Yasaman Ghasempour from Princeton University. You can see her bio there, but I'll read very quickly. But we were just talking, she just came from Rice University where she received her PhD and has a bachelor's degree from Sharif University of Technology. She's won numerous awards, an NSF Career Award, a Marconi Young Scholar Award, and an Excellence in Teaching Award. She's been here at Princeton for just under 3 years, I think, and has already been recognized as an outstanding scholar and teacher. She's, as you see, one of 10 stars worldwide in computer networking and communication in 2022. Cannot believe she was willing to do this for our first lecture. So would you please welcome to the Science on Saturday stage.
Thank you so much.
And Harry, if you could stop sharing for there we go, so we can see before you share. I just want everyone to see, everyone who's online too. So she knows the tradition that we have, which is to ask 3 questions before every lecture so that you get to know the speaker. And they're always the same questions. These questions were created by Ron Hatcher. And so when I took over from him, I said, I'm just going to keep on asking the same 3 questions. So with that, the first question, could you share with the audience, when did you first get interested in start to love science?
Thanks so much. First of all, hello, everyone. Welcome. Good morning. It's my absolute pleasure to be here after 3 years. Like, I just learned about that. What a pressure. I did most of my kind of high school, middle school in Iran. So I did my bachelor in Sharif University, as you just said. So until the age of 22, I was in Iran. And I knew that I was good at math and physics. And it was not like everyone knew that in my family. But like my mom and like my parents, like many of I'm sure that many can relate to that. They wanted me to be a doctor. And so I had to prove myself somehow that, look, I have a future in this. And I think at the age of 9 years old, I thought about, okay, what is broken? Let me fix it. Let me show that I can do things. And I remember we had this radio that was broken and no one was using it. And I just found it in the basement, and I think I spent like 3-4 weeks working on it, and I fixed it. And I went to hardware store, got pieces. It was just such a huge experience for me, and I guess helped a lot for my family believing in me that I can actually fix the stuff. So they actually, when everything was broken, like anything, they would actually say, okay, Yasaman, can you do that? I was like, yo, sure, my pleasure. So yeah, that's how it started.
That's excellent. Can you fix some?
Yeah, I'm fixing a smartphone.
So you've gone from elementary school to a PhD.
Yeah.
At some point, I'm sure there were many teachers who had an influence, but could you share with us one teacher who had a particular influence on you from your education?
Sure. I had a teacher back in middle school. So in Iran, we have this sort of special school for highly special, I don't know how they call it today. So it's basically there's some entrance exam and only like 1% of the whole population gets into this special schools. And I was lucky to be one of them. That means that from the age of 11, we had physics, we had chemistry, we had like biology, like separately, not just as one course, but separate courses. And I remember I had this absolutely wonderful physics teacher in like age of 12 or 13 that really believed in me. So she was telling me that, Yasaman, I have to come up with some questions for the physics Olympiad. Can you, I'm just wondering what is on your mind. Let's say if you want to create a really hard physics problem, what would that be? Can you come up with some examples? And like, I don't know if she was testing me or she was really looking for some sample tests to use for the exam. So, I mean, I came up with some question. I sent her some question, and I don't know if it was fake or not, but she really said, this is great. This is absolutely great. We're going to use that. Again, I have no idea if they ever use those questions in an actual Olympiad or not, but that was like, that gave me a lot of confidence back then. So that's my favorite teacher, I guess.
That's beautiful. And what problems did you give her?
I don't remember.
It sounds like it's probably like, you know, tell me how to solve what is a black hole.
No.
Here.
No, it was not that sophisticated.
So last question. That's all the science, but how about something that you enjoy doing, a hobby or something that's not science related?
Well, I love cooking. So not just for the purpose of eating, just as meditation sometimes. So I can cook, I think, all of the Persian meals very well. And my favorite one that I recommend everyone trying, I don't know if we have a good Persian cuisine around here or not, but definitely in New York. One of my favorite is fesenjun, which is a stew that has walnut in it. And basically you boil walnuts so until the oil comes out. So you don't add any oil, but the stew is kind of very like oily, but it's just the oil of walnut. It's super delicious. It should be slow cooked for like 12 hours or so. So you have to be patient with it. It has pomegranate sauce in it. So actually I'm getting hungry a little bit.
I was going to make it, instead of bagels and donuts, new requirement for speakers. Bring your favorite dish. So why don't you go ahead and share your screen? Thank you so much for sharing that. And we will share your screen. And the race for 6G, the challenges and opportunities ahead. Professor Yasaman Ghasempour, thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much. Thank you, everyone. So we're going to talk about wireless. We're going to talk about 6G. We're going to see what is the fuss about 6G. Everyone is talking about it, right? We just went over the cycle of 5G. Every 10 years or so, we have a new G. So it's easy to predict the next one would be 6G, and the one after that is 7G, of course. So let me start with a few questions. With a raise of hand, how many of you own 0 or 1 wireless device? That includes phone, smartwatch, laptop, smart TV, Xbox, I don't know. 0 or 1? 0 or 1, oh, okay. You don't have smartphones? Okay, 1, then that's good. How many of you own 2 or 3? 4? More than 4? Okay, cool. That's what I expected, right? So what kind of application you use your smartphone for the most? Like voice call and text. Okay, cool. Like GPS, like Maps, Google Maps. Okay. Anything video image, like Insta, Facebook, like TikTok, right? Now imagine how was this, oops. Let me see for that. Okay. Imagine these responses like people your age 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, right? So from this, you see the trend. We have more and more wireless devices, and we're using them for completely different applications that they were intended to do at the beginning, right? Just a few numbers. In 2023, the average number of wireless devices per person is 2.3. It's just amazing. Based on forecast, we have only like about 42 billion IoT devices by 2025. It's just more than Earth's population at this point, right? It's just so many devices, and we are generating so much data every day. Like in 2021, we generated 74 zettabytes. I don't know even how many zeros that would be. It's so much data, right? Now, even though we are talking about science today, it's important to know the economical and the political aspects of what we're talking about today. So look at the figure. Let me see if this thing works. Look at this figure here. So this is the 5G service market size, just the service part of it. And you see the exponential growth, right? By 2030, this is like 1,600 something $billion. It's massive. Look at this. This is the number of IoT markets. So 2017 to 2025, it's about 39% growth. It's again fascinating, right? Now, who are the key players? Who are the key stakeholders, like internationally for this, right? Look at here. So these are the number of companies like listed based on the number of patents, the number of innovations they had on 5G, right? You see, US is not really leading this, right? Like the best that we have, Qualcomm is ranked like 5 or so, right? So this is not just about science at this point. It's about like being the best, leading the world on the technology side, and having kind of political power on 6G and above, right? That's why there's a lot of investment right now at the government. There's a lot of funding. There's a lot of things happening in 6G. So wireless is really hot. Like we've been talking about data science, machine learning, AI for so long. I think wireless is just as hot right now, and it's getting hotter and hotter because of this political competitiveness that we have to deal with. Anyway, enough with politics. We have not just been using these wireless devices for like normal use cases, but we have a lot of emerging applications. Autonomous cars, we have been hearing about them a lot. It's just not about making sure that the car can perform by its own. These cars have to communicate with each other, have to communicate with the infrastructure, right? And we need to have that in a very low latency manner. Why? Because there will be a pedestrian kind of jumping into the street, and we have to make that decision in the millisecond. Otherwise, it's going to be a collision. It's going to be a disaster, right? So we're generating a lot of data with these autonomous vehicles because we are putting a lot of sensors on them. They have radar, they have LiDAR, they have cameras, right? And now they have to send this information and share this information among others, so they get global sort of knowledge and they can make meaningful decisions, right? So these amount of data, sharing them on a very low latency manner, it's not something that today's 5G can even do. So we really need more advancement on the technological side. Virtual reality is another example of that. We need very fast and very low latency, and these are two different things, by the way, communications, right? We've been using like robots and wireless technology on them for various type of sensing, like for example, robotic surgery. Again, here you're using wireless signals, not just to communicate, but also to sense, to figure out the exact millimeter scale motion of your target or your organ, or like trying to basically do very sophisticated stuff by just relying on wireless signals. Gesture sensing is another one using wireless signals. My point showing this slide is, it's great, 5G is great, but we're still far from what we need to make these applications reality. Okay, so before I jump into the cool stuff, 6G stuff, let me spend a few minutes explaining the fundamental of wireless communication for those of you who are not familiar, especially if we have kids, high school, middle school students around us. This will be super cool. So when we say communication, what we mean is from your end user, your smartphone, all the way to the internet. That's going to be servers that Facebook has and Amazon have, so on and so forth, right? Today, we're going to mostly talk about the wireless hub, which is from your phone to your base station or your router at your home. From here to Ethernet is going to be wired connected. So there are a lot of things, interesting things happening in this hub, which we're not talking about today. We're talking about this wireless part, which is over the air, right? So you can see that we'll use this for sending our information to the router and then to the internet. We call this uplink data, or we use this communication for downloading a stuff or getting a stuff from the server. That's downlink, right? From the internet to the router and to the smartphone. The good thing about wireless is that it can support mobility. With wired, you need to have physical connection, and that's not really scalable. But for wireless, you can move around. You can actually have multiple users. So it's just much more scalable, right? But it comes with its own disadvantage, and we're going to talk about this. What is challenging about wireless is that when we are talking about wired communication, everything is isolated. You have a wire, it's a fiber, right? It's a conductor. You send the signal, it goes through that wire, and it reaches its destination. Yes, it's going to be some losses. Yes, it has a capacity. You'll see probably your Ethernet cable also have a capacity of 1 gigabit per second or 10 gigabit per second, depending on how much you're paying your Verizon or other, right? So it has a fixed capacity, but there's no randomness in the system. Like everything you send goes through, you'll see it on the other end, cool, right? In the wireless domain, everything is so complicated. You're sending this signal and broadcasting it everywhere. Hits like different objects, different like passes through different environment. There's noise, there's interference, right? And it reaches this destination here. And then you're hoping that after so much noise and interference, you can still retrieve your signal, retrieve the message that was sent, right? Like hoping really. So it's much more complicated just to think about the things that can go wrong in the wireless domain. Now that was about just one user, right? Now imagine you have multiple users, right? If you want to connect multiple users in a wired setting, you need, again, wire connection. You need to have physical deployment. It's costly. Maintaining wire is not cost efficient, really. So, but for wireless, it's actually just you buy a new smartphone and you basically put in your password, your Wi-Fi password, and you're good to go, right? Nothing needs to be done. It's just that was the main advantage of using wireless to begin with. But it comes with a lot of challenges. Now, remember I told you we want to have uplink data as well as downlink data, right? Now remember here, let's say you have this guy want to send a message and this one want to send, I don't know, a video. Right? If they don't coordinate, if there is no rule in the system, they're going to interfere. The signal that they send will interfere with each other. And on the end, on this base station here, you have no idea what was sent. Like you cannot distinguish between these two signals. So you need some rules, you need some housekeeping rules to make sure that these receivers take turn or do some efficient way of resource allocation so that they can communicate without interfering with each other, right? So that's what we call MAC layer protocols, medium access layer protocol. This is good. The other issue here is when you have this signal being broadcasted everywhere, that means that you can have one transmitter being active at the same time, right? It's very different from like wired, which is like just one physical connection. Or if you, let's say, could have done a laser point-to-point connection, then it's just that laser beam. You're not sending anything anywhere else, right? That would have been nice, but that's not what we're doing today. We're broadcasting our information everywhere. That will change with 6G, and we will talk about that soon. The other issue is the security issue. I mean, my group works also at wireless security, and I can just talk about that for another 2 hours. But it's just wireless security is an important topic. Again, you're broadcasting your information everywhere, and you can have an eavesdropper listening at your conversation and trying to figure out a pattern. Yes, information is encrypted, but it can also, I mean, just the pattern of you sending information can leak information about your life, right? Like I can have an eavesdropper, like, I don't know, in the street, listening in Wi-Fi connectivity of you at your home and figure out if you are home or you are actually on vacation, I can do that, right? It's just, there's nothing, I mean, I just listen to the signal that I am receiving. Don't want to give ideas to anyone out there, but it's just easy to, or you can eavesdrop on your neighbors. You can hear their Wi-Fi. You can see how much activity they have in their home, which is not ideal, right? So there are ways around this, and it's an important topic, but not the topic of today's talk. Okay. As I said, we have a lot of attenuation and errors in wired connection. We know that signals, like, by the way, TX stands for transmitter, RX stands for receiver. Your signal decays slightly as propagates inside the wire, but it's very reliable. Just to give you an idea, and this is a real number, 1 bit flips every 10 to the power of 10 bits, right? Every 10 to the power of 10 bits, 1 bit flips. Wonderful, right? This number for wireless is 1 bit every 100 or every 10,000 bits, right? So, and that's just about noise. We also have interference, other wireless transmitters talking to other receivers, right? So your bit error rate, or the number of bits that flip at the end of the day, depends on your signal strength, right? The received power, that is the intended received signal, divided by interference plus noise. So the higher this number, you have an easier job of decoding your signal and retrieving your information, and you can send information faster, right? So we really want to increase this guy over here. And well, we cannot really control noise or interference. We can probably increase the received signal power if we increase our transmitted power, but we'll see soon that that's not really the best strategy as well. I always give this example of, like, if you are in a crowded restaurant and you want to talk to your group, your people, right? If it's really crowded, there's a lot of noise, you cannot really hear each other until you speak faster. Sorry, louder, right? If you speak louder, then maybe, right? It's exactly the same for like wireless connectivity. Okay. This signal also get attenuated when they bounce off walls, they reflect, they penetrate through objects, so on and so forth. There's a lot happening. Okay, now, as I said at the beginning, we really want to increase our data rate, right? To make sure that we can support those applications that I mentioned at the beginning. And we also want to support many more users, because, like, we have 42 billion something IoT nodes that we have to support, right? So first question is how to achieve these higher rates. Then if it was a wired system, the answer was easy, right? Just add more wires, right? Very costly, but that's gonna work, right? In wireless, is there a limit, like, or is there a capacity on how much data I can send over wireless medium? It's not really intuitive. The answer is not intuitive. I can send as much as data as I want, right? Nothing stops me. But it turned out that there is a cap, and we'll talk about it in a second. There's a very famous scientist known as Shannon who actually dealt this problem with the theoretical level and also experimental level. We'll get to that. So is there a limit on how much data we can send over wireless medium? Yes. The second question is how can we support more users? Where again, if it was wired, add more wires. If it was on the wireless side, the question is, how can I increase the number of links without causing interference, right? And I can have this transmitter talking to this receiver, this transmitter talking to this receiver, right? But this receiver here, right here, is in the coverage area of both of these transmitters. That means that it's going to hear signal from this guy as well as this guy, right? So if these two transmitters don't take turns, it's going to be very difficult for that particular receiver to decode its message. Okay, so we want a way of increasing the number of users without causing interference. Okay, one last slide on the fundamental part. So it's important to know how do we send this information anyway, right? So we basically carry our information on top of electromagnetic waves. So I'm sure like many of you are familiar with this EM waves, but for those who aren't, it's just an oscillating electric field, an oscillating magnetic field, and these are propagating wave, right? So if I, like, let's say, look at this XYZ, let's say I'm located here, right? I see the signal approaching me, so I'll see in time domain, there's a periodic signal. In a space also, it's a periodic signal, right? So you can see that the signal repeats itself in a space as well as in time, right? And this is like the carrier for our communication signals. So, and these are like kind of very fundamental definitions because it's repeating itself in a space, right? That the length or the distance it travels until it finishes one cycle is called the wavelength of the signal. And how fast it's actually completing one cycle, it's called the frequency of the signal. Or in another way, if you just look at 1 second of your signal, how many cycles you see is the frequency of your signal. Okay, so if frequency is higher, your signal is just faster, right? Cool. So this is how the spectrum in general looks like, right? Higher frequencies, we've been using them for X-rays, for a lot of like UVs that you see are like kind of really high frequency signals. Visible light is here, like, so you see the range of visible light. And lower frequencies like infrared, we have some infrared camera, you might know that. So then we have terahertz, which is very interesting in a spectrum because it has very interesting features that we will talk about in this talk. And then lower frequencies, microwave, radio waves, we've been using them for communication traditionally. So we're moving in this higher in this spectrum as we go to sort of next generation of wireless. Okay, so I said these EM waves carry our information. How do we actually embed our information in an EM wave? You can model them as a sine wave, and your information can be either in the peak value of this sine wave. Let's say I say if the peak value was a over 2a, an arbitrary number, I'm sending 0. If it was a, I'm sending 1, beta of 1, right? Frequency modulation is just, let's say, if I'm sending, it's a delay, okay. If I'm, okay. So if I'm sending, let's say F, I'm sending beta of 1. If I'm sending faster, let's be frequency of 2F, I'm sending 0. And I can also embed information in the phase of the signal, okay? So there are different modulations. You can use them based on the needs of the, like you can do mix and match also in the communication settings, but these are the design specs that we have. These are the space of things that we can change about EM waves. Okay. So as I mentioned before, there is a capacity in wireless links, and a famous scientist called Shannon modeled this. And you can see the capacity is a function of W being the range of frequencies that you are using, right? W is your bandwidth, the bandwidth of the signal. If you have more frequencies at your disposal, you can send more information. So it's linearly correlated with W. And then log 2 of 1 plus basically the SNR of your message, which is received power divided by noise plus interference, right? So if my received power increases, my capacity increases, that means that I can send information faster. If my W increases, similarly, if I'm using more bandwidth, I can send more information. I can send information faster, okay? So why increasing the transmit power is not a good idea? I mean, it seems so intuitive. Increase your transmit power, there will be some losses along the way, but that loss is going to be probably fixed, like on average. So your received power will also increase, right? We are good. So we can increase the capacity based on that. Well, it's a good idea unless everyone is using it, right? So again, if you are in that crowded restaurant and you shout or you speak louder, yes, your intended receiver can hear it. But now if all of a sudden everyone speaks louder, we are back to square zero, right? So that's why, yes, you can do that, but that means that you're gonna increase the interference problem. Let's say this transmitter over here increased its transmit power now until, instead of reaching until here, it can reach until here, right? It can just travel more. That means that this guy was not in the interference zone before, but now it's in the interference zone. Cool. So not really a good idea. So we are not really left with that many options, but increasing this W here, right? If we increase W, we are more hopeful. An example that I always give to my student is that basically imagine driving in a highway, right? Capacity is just the number of lanes that you have in that highway. If you have more lanes, you are more confident the speed limit is probably higher, right? So you can go faster. That's what we wanted, right? The speed can go higher. But also if you have more lanes, there are more cars that can be in that road at the same time. So with one thing, we are hitting two targets, right? And that's a cool picture showing this is 4G, this is 5G. I mean, 5G is not quite there yet, but let's give it the benefit of that for a second. But yeah, so more lanes is good, is always good. Okay, why can't I just increase my number of lanes then? Well, you are always restricted with other things, right? Let's say if I want to increase the number of lanes in this street in Manhattan. Well, I cannot really do that because there are buildings around it, right? So I cannot increase it as much as I want. The same exact thing happening in the power spectrum. So this is the power spectrum. How crowded our spectrum looks like right now. And different colors shows what we're using this band of frequency for different purposes, for radar, for defense, it's just so much different varieties of things that we are using this frequency band for. So even if we want to extend it, it's like really not our choice or our ability to do that, right? Okay, so here comes the 6G pitch that, look, right now, so far, we've been operating in below 6 gigahertz regime, like here. Today's Wi-Fi LTE operate here. You see these narrow bars? That's the bandwidth that we are using right now, right? If we look beyond that, like above 28, all the way to 100 gigahertz, this rectangle shows the amount of bandwidth that is available to use. It's not occupied by any other application. It's up for grasp. We can use them for wireless communication, right? Like recently, FCC released 14 gigahertz of bandwidth in the 60 gigahertz band alone. So center at 60, roughly plus minus 7 gigahertz is available for Wi-Fi communication. It's unlicensed, meaning that you don't need to pay to use that spectrum. It's going to be the next Wi-Fi spectrum, right? This 20-something gigahertz, some part is like licensed, meaning that the government auctions them for the carriers to buy, like Verizon, T-Mobile, AT&T. Some of them are unlicensed, right? So my point here is that we have just so much more bandwidth at the higher frequencies. If we go above 100 gigahertz, right, that's what we call terahertz. It's not like technically terahertz, but the community calls it terahertz. We have even more bandwidth that I'm not even showing here. It's just so much. It's just a free room, free food for everyone, right? So gigahertz scale bandwidth, according to the Shannon formula that I showed you, like remember C equals W something, right? So if W is gigahertz scale, C can be gigabit per second scale. So if I have 1 gigahertz of bandwidth, I can reach to gigabit per second scale data rate very easily, right? In fact, there is a lot of sort of saying out there saying that 6G will be about terahertz frequency. We have some deployment of 5G millimeter wave right now. It's not working perfectly, and I'll show you in a video. But like 6G will be probably complementing a millimeter wave and adding to it by using terahertz frequencies. Okay, so what is fundamentally different? Let me check time. Okay, what is fundamentally different here? When we have low frequency communication, as I mentioned earlier, we are broadcasting our information everywhere, right? That means that if my receiver moves a little bit, as long as it is within the coverage area, which is like kilometer or something long, I can still hear the same signal, right? You probably experience like when you are driving fast in a highway, your like signal cut off like for a few seconds and then restored, right? That's because you are moving really fast. So you're going from one coverage area to another coverage area. But if you're just walking normally or biking, or it never happens, right? So The problem is now that I go to higher frequencies, the wavelengths is smaller, right? The penetration loss, reflection loss, everything just so lossier. So if I use the same omnidirectional communication method, I'm not going to get to good range. Like, this is not just possible. So instead, what we do is we focus our energy into particular directions where our receiver is located at, right? That's kind of similar to a laser beam communication. Right? So I'm focusing, not wasting power everywhere else. I'm just focusing all my power into specific directions, right? And that way I can compensate for those additional losses. That's all very good, but there are a lot of challenges building this, like implementing this in practice. But in theory, you can show that it's gonna work. So this is a slide from Qualcomm 6G vision or 5G vision, and you'll see that we have a lot of different use cases. This is like crowded streets with like infrastructures, cars, people communicating with each other all the time. The good thing about this directional communication is that because you are not sending your information everywhere, you can have many of these directional links coexist at the same time. They don't need to take turns anymore, right? We can just all of a sudden, using same frequency band, same space, accommodate way more number of users that we could ever do before. So that helps us with our second goal, which was increasing the number of users. And I said it's gonna, in practice, or in principle, helps us with our first goal, which was increasing the data rate per user, right? So these are all good news. What's the bad news here? The challenge is to make this signal directional, you just need to put way more number of antennas in it, right? You have to have massive number of antennas and do like beamforming technique so that you can create these super sharp beams, right? So this is a signal, this is a kind of array from DARPA. This is a commercial 60 gigahertz array from Sivers. This is from IBM. So the good thing is the individual antennas, you see this, these are individual antennas. The individual antennas are very tiny. The individual antenna, the size of each antenna is the same order of magnitude as your wavelengths. Our wavelengths here is in the order of millimeter. So with the same size in my smartphone, right, I can pack a lot more antennas without increasing the size of my smartphone, which is perfect, right? So I can, in principle, again, pack a lot of antennas into the same form factor and do this beamforming. But just building these arrays, especially above 100 gigahertz, is just a very challenging problem, like scientifically. There's like heat dissipation issues. There is like, how do you want to control this antenna? It's not just having an antenna, but you want to put a kind of precise amplitude phase to each antenna so that control line becomes so sophisticated. It becomes power hungry, right? It's doable, but it's a scientific problem on how to do this efficiently. Especially for your end users, right? We really don't care about the access point or base station. They can burn a lot of power. Like, it's not good for the environment, but they can do it, right? But the smartphones really can't afford that. The other challenge is mobility. I have to find where my user is so that I can point to it, right? But if my user is mobile and is just moving, that means that I have to keep track of that. Otherwise, as soon as the user moves out of the beam direction, I'm going to lose my signal. That's not really ideal anyway. Like, imagine, like, I tell you that I can sell you a technology that can get you to 10 gigabits per second only if you hold a still like this and you can use your device. If you turn, sorry, you're not going to buy that, right? So we have to solve this problem if we want to make 6G a success. So this is not, again, a big problem for like using this 6G technology for your like a smart TV because it's fixed, but like for virtual reality headset, for your normal mobile application, it's going to be a big deal. The other issue, kind of I said it as briefly a few minutes ago, is blockage. Even human body is, I mean, forget about penetrating through walls and everything. Even human body, your clothes, your case like cover can block this signal. right? So how do I want to have a technology that is so sensitive to blockage? Like, that's another challenge that we have to deal with. Okay. So one way that it's implemented right now in IEEE standard is kind of the most naive way of thinking about that. Like basically doing an exhaustive search, like me looking in all direction, access point looks in all directions, sends information, receivers does the same thing, and then they find a beam that gives them the maximum SNR, maximum power, and just lock into that. If you have mobility, just repeat that. As simple as that, right? The problem with this is that the time it takes for you to find the right beam configuration can be much longer than the amount it takes to send that like information or the data that you want to send. So that's, again, everything is faster, right? But if you think about your actual throughput, your actual data rate, it's not that high because it's this guy divided by this plus this, right? So again, we have a long way to go to make this more efficient. I mean, things that come to mind is that why don't we use like GPS to figure out where our user located at? And once we have that GPS information, we can log. Well, GPS has the error of like meter scale. We're talking here about centimeter scale resolution, right? So they don't really match. Why not using cameras so that we can process and figure out where everybody is located at and then use that information to adapt our beams? Well, you can do that, but good luck convincing people to have cameras on in every room. And so there's a lot of privacy issues. There's like, this is not going to work, right? So in my group, what we do is we rely on these millimeter wave and terahertz signal themselves to localize the receiver. Our idea was that, look, because the attenuation is higher, you only have really a few number of paths, like reflected path or line of sight path, that can reach your receiver. If you can sense those and track those, you are good to go. You can just instantly beam and steer to that direction. If there is a blockage, you have a backup path. You just look at your reflected path. And if you have mobility, again, if you have real-time track of those paths, you're good to go, right? So instead of using like going outside and trying to use camera or other sensors, why not use wireless signals themselves to sense the location and orientation of your receiver? The example that I give is that, like, let's say you want to do this efficiently. You want to figure out where these paths are located at. You can look everywhere. That takes forever, right? Or you can be smart about it and see there is some correlation. Like, if I'm looking this way and I'm seeing a bad signal, probably the direction right next to it is not going to give me a good signal as well, right? So I can come up with algorithms and like adaptive ways of thinking about the problem on figuring out this path such that it takes minimum amount of time, right? So the example again here is that, let's say you have this picture covered and you want to guess what animal is that. Like, you basically are given with this part. And I tell you, okay, you can flip these pixels however you want, and the winner will be the person who can give me like, okay, it's a cow with minimum number of bits, with minimum number of flips. What would be your strategy, right? So let's say I flip this one first, and should I go ahead with the exact next one? Or should I go somewhere else so that I get diverse information? What would be your strategy? Really depends on what this pixel tells me, right? So if I first like flip this one, this is just grass. Like if I flip the one next to it, it's probably grass again, right? So that's not wise for me to flip the next one. But if I flip this one, I say, okay, this is probably an ear or something, so I can probably look right next to it. So you can apply the same strategy for this wireless sensing approach. And again, we're not going to the details of that here, but happy to take questions on that. Okay, the blockage issue is serious, right? So, and I want to show you if, let's say if this guy plays, I want to show you a real implementation of this in Manhattan. I think it doesn't look, give me 1 second. I knew this is going to happen, so I had this guy open. Okay, so this is the real implementation of 5G millimeter wave in Manhattan and the coverage issues around this. So it's going to be only 2 minutes or so.
5G signal died. Oh my God, where is it? Still nothing. This is a terrible, terrible early adopter experience. Come on, 5G. Oh, I got it. Boom, there it is, see that? Okay, you ready? Now follow me back over. Da-da-da-da-da-da. And it's gone. Just myself. Maybe if I move out from the sidewalk a bit. Oh my God, I had a 5G signal. Dennis, you ruined everything. You gotta be kidding me. How to drop your millimeter wave only 5G connection. Excuse me, sir. Yeah, thanks. Gotta get my 5G here. How to block your millimeter wave only 5G connection? Just move under an umbrella. It's gone, just like that, it's just gone. No more 5G. You want your 5G back, you gotta get out from under the umbrella. Sorry guys, and give it a hot minute. Maybe turn your data back on and off. There you go, all right. It's great, it's a good experience. And it's gone. And it's gone. 4G. And there it goes, it's gone. How easy is it to drop a millimeter wave only 5G connection? Well, you don't even have to make it all the way into the subway. Let's see how many steps this takes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and we're done. We're done, bud. All right, so you guys get the point. Now it's time to answer the question that surely everyone has on their mind right now. What exactly is T-Mobile?
One thing that we can do to solve this blockage is to rely on multiple frequency bands, right? Like low frequency together with high frequency. So if the high frequency fails, you can just rely back on low frequency. There's again scientific question about how to manage that. The cool thing that we do in my lab is a little bit different. So we are trying to make the environment more intelligent, right? Remember I told you the environment is not really up for control. We cannot change noise or interference, but that was not really 100% true. We can do that. How? We can have smart reflecting surfaces mounted on the wall. Like it can be a painting, it can be your wallpaper actually. And then with that, you can control how this signal bounce off of your wall. So normal reflection looks like this, right? Angle of reflection equals angle of incidence, right? It's laws of physics, you cannot bend it, right? But if I put like an array of very inexpensive, scalable, small metals arrays there, so what I can do is I can create whatever form of reflection I want. I can change the angle, I can just make it just absorb, focus, split, change the polarization, you name it, I can do it, right? This will look something like this. So these smart surfaces will be in like, let's say, cubicle space, large conference rooms, and then you can control the reflection pattern, or you can engineer the reflection from these surfaces however you want, and use that for the purpose of going over blockage, meaning that basically if I can have a reflector that can give me any angle that I want, I can always guarantee a backup path to my user wherever it's located at, which is perfect, right? So this is kind of very, very interesting technology that we are building. Also, other universities are working on that. This is a picture from CMU. This is the wallpaper that is smart and can give you that like very cool reflected path. At Princeton, we are working on the same idea for satellite communication. Well, low orbit satellite is a big deal. We didn't have time to go through it, but basically the idea is to have surfaces mounted on basically tall buildings to cover blind spots, also to make sure that signal can penetrate through walls, like have basically the surfaces on your window, so you can bring the outdoor signal indoor and the other way around, so you can kind of cover this blockage hole. So we talked about mobility, we talked about blockage. I kind of briefly mentioned that there will be some challenges regarding power. So this will be more power demanding. So I just want to have 1 or 2 slides on that. The idea is that you go to higher frequencies, generating signals will be more power demanding, detecting them will be more power demanding. You have multiple antennas, as I said earlier, that is power demanding, right? So it's important to think about how can we make the power, like make them more power efficient, especially for IoT, handheld devices, so on and so forth, right? Our key idea in the lab was that, look, for many applications, especially in the IoT settings, you don't need to generate your own wireless signal. What you can do is you can piggyback your data on top of an ambient signal. Let's say you have a powerful base station sending a signal, like sending a wireless radio signal. And let's say this is your IoT node, like a light, right? So you want to basically make this guy send 1001100, right? What I can do is I can say, okay, whenever I'm sending 1, I just make this guy reflect whatever signal exists in the environment. If I'm sending 0, I just don't reflect, right? Very easy. Like, it's kind of an amplitude modulation. You're changing the amplitude of your signal, but you are not burning any power because you're not generating new signal. This is called backscattering. So you can see that 1 because I'm reflecting 0, 0 because I'm not reflecting, so on and so forth. And I can have another receiver is complicated, another, like, let's say base station or like a node that can deal with high power consumption, decoding this information. Okay, so this is also very interesting. We have the idea of backscattering at lower frequencies. The RFID tags that you use have backscattering in it, some version of that, near field backscattering. But making this work at higher frequencies is very challenging because you just make sure that everything works in an ultra wideband manner, meaning that we have like gigahertz scale bandwidths that has to do the same thing. And also you want this reflection to be directional, again, without having sophisticated antenna arrays on the other side. I don't have time to go to the details of that, but this is a paper that will come up in April from our group. What we're doing is, this is the first terahertz backscattering in the world. What we do is like using leaky wave antennas and the cool boundary condition Maxwell equations around it to make retrodirective links that operate at 150 to 500 gigahertz. It's like the cost of that is a few cents to build, and it consumes almost 0 power, and it's directional. So kind of that's going to be one of the next cool things that's going to come out in a few months. So right now we are using like very small millimeter scale MEMS mirror inside the waveguide, inside the cavity of the waveguide. This is 1 millimeter. So it's very cool science. We are using also an active modulators, not in this picture, but in a different project, to modulate this terahertz signal inside 1 millimeter cavity in a fast mode. Okay, let's zoom out a little bit. We are toward the end of the talk. So what I talked about is I gave you some applications. I told you why we need this high frequency signal, millimeter wave and terahertz band, because they can potentially provide us more length. They can give us gigabit per second or even terabit per second connections. They can support many more users at the same time. I talked about some of the challenges like blockage, mobility, coverage, power consumption, so on and so forth. I just want to make sure that, you know, this is not the only technology that we're thinking about for 6G. This is just part of it, right? Going to higher frequencies is part of it. There are other technologies out there. Again, we didn't have time to go through them. But just to give you an idea, we are basically doing a lot of network programming and prediction, traffic management, traffic prediction, mostly on the wired side that I didn't talk about at all. We do network slicing. We do a lot of joint communication and sensing, using wireless signal for communication to help the sensing part, so on and so forth. Kind of it's a loop. Using just massive number of antennas or massive MIMO for creating these very directional beams, but at low frequency. And also visible light communication. I have one slide on the last two parts because they are important, and it's done. So massive MIMO is saying that, look, this directional communication was very cool. It can give us multiple concurrent links, but we don't need to go to higher frequencies to achieve that. We can just put many more antennas on the current base station and increase the received power because of this beamforming gain. So it's good. It's like the deployment of this will be easier because you don't need to change your whole front end, your whole circuits to do that. You just need to use the conventional way of using like conventional base station, just adding more antenna on top. So there are a lot of like companies right then already deploying this massive MIMO base station in different cities. Visible light is a different sort of technology that people are pursuing right now. The idea is that we can use our indoor luminaries, existing luminaries, for communication. Concept of information shower. It's very interesting. Like basically, if you are within this field of view of your indoor luminaries, you get massive number of bits, like massive data rates. But if you are outside that, you don't see, again, this is really directional, right? It's light. So you can have, like, say, kiosks when people can go hold their phone there for 1 second and download like 10 movies, right? In airports, I mean, that would be really popular, right? Or subways or stuff like that. So it's called information sharing. The pros is you have a lot more bandwidth actually compared to millimeter wave and terahertz. So possibly very large, very high data rates. It's a mature technology. Light is a mature technology, right? We know how to detect light and how to transmit light for so many years, even before radio, right? So that's why the technology is mature. That means that it's inexpensive. It's cheap to do that, which is good, right? And the infrastructure already exists. So these are the pros. Cons is when you see interference from sunlight. It's the same frequency band, so you have to deal with that, right? Number two is the way that we are modulating on signal on top of this light is that basically your LEDs will switch on and off, but they do it very fast. So your eyes cannot see it, but it's sending information, right? We have to be careful about that because if it might be invisible to eyes, but it can impact our brain. It can give us like headaches if we are not really, can give us flickering, and then it's not really good for us. So we have to be really careful about how we modulate our signal on top of this. And the last challenge is that, yes, downlink is good, but uplink, you cannot put an LED on your mobile phone. So the other way around is just not going to work, right? So for downlink, good. You need an alternative uplink for that. Cool. Okay, so I want to acknowledge that this was not possible without my great students that you can see in the picture. Also our collaborators at Princeton, MIT, Rice, Brown, Northeastern, and Intel. Also thanks to NSF, DARPA, Air Force, and Microsoft for giving us money so that we can do research. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for just a wonderful lecture, starting off the 2023 Science on Saturday in such a beautiful, beautiful way. I was getting ready to go out, I'm going to do 5G, 4G, 5G, 4G. So what we're going to do is we're getting microphones for people who have questions that are going to come. You'll see, we'll start in the auditorium. If anyone on Zoom right now would like to ask a question, I see we have almost 100 people on Zoom. If you use the raised hand function, or if you want, you can put it into the chat. I'll do my best to go back and forth between the two. So with that, we've got people on both sides. If you raise your hand here, I see a hand right there, and then off we go.
Hello. Hi. Thank you for the talk. So my understanding was 5G was the technology between a cell phone tower and a cell phone. This kind of suggests like this is also between router and, I guess, a device. Is it the same technology or different protocols?
So there are two different ways of like doing wireless, as I mentioned, right? So you have part of the spectrum that is licensed, and like carriers like Verizon actually pay the government, pay FCC to use that frequency, right? and you have to pay them to use that frequency then, right? The other way of thinking about it is that you buy a router and it's unlicensed. So you and your neighbors and everyone else using the same part of the spectrum. That's why it's more local, right? You cannot have everyone talk to each other using that frequency. It's more like range limited, because then that would be really high interference, right? So we really want both of those technology to boost their links, because you can use your virtual reality headset at home, right? You want to use your smart TV that like gives you 4K video, whatever, at home, right? So that needs to go up. We also have a lot of application like autonomous car that needs outdoor coverage and high rate and more number of users. So these two technologies are advancing neck to neck. They're not competitive of each other, right? But they can use the same kind of technology, like more antenna going to higher frequencies is kind of common between the two technologies.
We have a question over here.
Are you also studying the impact of all these powerful signals on, like they're saying, because of the 4G, 5G, all the birds are dying, honeybees extinction. So
yeah, so there is no evidence of that. We are not studying in our lab, but there is no evidence of having like 5G signals changing anything about. So these signals are not changing any chemical, they're not changing the way that like molecules or organs or like different reactions that, but it's not X-ray, right? It's much low power. It's the wavelengths is just much longer. So there is no evidence that 5G will have any impact on health or migration patterns of birds whatsoever.
So just playing off of that, there's a question in the chat, which I think I understand, which says pylons being erected and cables strung across the landscape, please explain. So I take that to mean, what does this mean for our environment when we talk about some of the possible ways that we get to 6G?
Very good question. So having sustainability and sustainable communication is a big deal, right? So if you put more IoT nodes out there, these are like silicons, right? Silicons is not an organic material, right? It's a waste, right? So if these IoT nodes die after a few years, they are a waste. We are harming the environment. We are burning a lot more power, and I talked about that, right? So how to have a more sustainable material, organic material, to build the circuits that is the fabric of this technology, that's one challenge. Other people are working on it. How to have the communication part more sustainable, like without battery, let's say, like packet scattering is a good example of that, because you don't need a huge battery. You can just like consume very little power, modulating ambient signals. So how to do more of that at longer range, at higher data rates can really help the environment.
Thank you. We have a question over here.
Yeah. So I have a quick question, which is, there's 5G, and there's also 5 gigahertz. Now we have 6G and there's 6 gigahertz. Those have nothing to do with each other, right?
Yeah, so we have a lot that's going on. So 6G is a like big umbrella, really. Kind of, it's a marketing term, right? When we talk about like in our conferences, in our seminar, we never say, oh, I published a paper on 6G. People would laugh at me if I say that, right? It's a big umbrella, it's a marketing term, but what's really happening underneath it is that there's a lot of innovations at different frequency bands. Some of them are existing 2.45 gigahertz band, as I mentioned, having massive number of antennas, massive MIMO on top of that. Some of them is really in mid band, some of them is really in high frequency. I really only talked about the high frequency stuff today, because that's the more exciting part to me, and that's what we do in our lab.
The confusion is just a sad coincidence on timing.
No, these are like happening all at the same time. So there's a lot of, like, if you think about how each frequency becomes available, there's a lot of non-scientific reasons behind it. Like there are a lot of stakeholders, companies, right? So let's say if you already have technology that works on 6 gigahertz, you really want 6 gigahertz to be the next big thing, right? Like as a company, right? So that's why there's a lot of push between different stakeholders on what is going to be the next big things. And we really don't know it. Like as like people in university, we have to kind of look at this in terms of what is the open research problem, what is really fundamentally challenging here. But then the economical aspect of that and what is the cost of deployment, that's really not my expertise to talk about.
So we have a question from Zoom, but
Yeah,
Arturo's going to read it.
An online question from Jasib Sahir. what kind of regulatory changes will need to be made by countries to plan for 6G?
That's a very good question. Again, I don't know if I'm at the place of answering that, but I'll try to give some thoughts on this. So when we are thinking about one frequency band, like using one frequency band in US, that doesn't mean that that same frequency band is available in China or Europe, right? Different companies use their frequency band differently, right? So there is a lot that needs to happen to make sure the smartphone that I'm using can be used wherever I go, wherever I travel in the world, right? So that part needs to be done. The regulation on maximum transmit power, on what frequencies can coexist with each other. You've probably seen this big news on, airplanes could not fly because of 5G tower next to airports, right? Like it was a few months ago, right? So there is like a lot happening and make sure that this new frequency band that we are opening to public, and all of a sudden there will be much more traffic in those frequency band, is not interfering with existing like technology, like including radars, including LiDAR, including like everything, right? So those things that needs to happen before we'll see a real deployment of 6G.
There's a question over here to your left.
Thank you for the great talk. So we're at 5G, but we also had 2G and 3G, which a lot of it has been decommissioned. Do those bands and do that technology get repurposed, or what happens to all that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Some of those technologies are operating on the same frequency band, which means that the same spectrum now, like the technology is different, meaning that the way that you like have those housekeeping rules and have the protocol stack on that is going to be different. So it's not going to, like that part is already being solved, right? Because it's the same frequency band. Some of it's a different frequency band. And that means that you cannot use the same antenna for 2G and let's say 5G, right? Then the question is, should I kind of keep that 2G circuitry in my smartphone so that if my 5G is getting blocked, I can just go backward to my 2G if needed, right? I think that you don't need to go all the way to 2G, right? I mean, in the video, you saw that if 5G was not working, it converted to like 4G LTE. So we need some backward compatibility. So we're not getting rid of all the Gs before 5 or 6G, but we don't need to. It's also a software issue, so you don't really want to make things complicated at the hardware level.
There's another question right there.
Yes.
Yeah, my question is also about repurposing. I just want to know if anyone's going to do anything with like any type of the radio bands, like, because I know some people are concerned about like maybe some radio bands might be like repurposed, like maybe AM radio because there's not as much of a demand for it, or maybe some of the ham radio bands.
Yeah.
I just wonder if like that might be repurposed for anything, or like kind of taken away for like the purpose of using it for radio.
Yeah, sometimes it's used for research purposes. Sometimes it's used for sensing. Like I really didn't have time to go through this, but using wireless signals for the purpose of sensing is a really big deal right now. Like the gesture sensing application that I showed, like the video I showed earlier, is just using wireless signals for the purpose of sensing. So we can use some of those cool applications. We can build some of those cool applications on top of the previous bands that are not popular anymore because of their small bandwidths.
I think we have a question. Yep, here we are, right in the middle. It should be on. Hold on, it's not on.
Hi, can you hear me? I said I'm here because of my son. He's the science geek in the house. But I have some basic questions. So I have a 5G fancy phone, and my husband has an outdated, I'm guessing 4G, most likely. But I don't see the difference. And is it only because of the blockage? Like, why all this hype about 5G when I'm really not seeing the difference as a consumer between the two? That's the first question.
That's a very good question. I'll get to that. Okay, maybe you want to ask your second question.
The second one was a little bit around what we've kind of heard. So I have a friend of mine who stopped using the microwave because she's worried about the microwave frequencies impacting her health. Similarly, I've heard about, I shouldn't be keeping my phone next to my head and sleeping. So now when we move up these frequency levels, what are the health impacts of higher frequencies? And how do you, as a scientist, coordinate with maybe the biology side of it and the scientists that are looking at research around frequency waves on human beings? Like, how does that collaboration happen?
That's a very good question. So let me start with your first question, which was a really good one. So the 5G that you're seeing right now, I mean, 99% of the time, it's not millimeter wave. It's the old frequencies, but like everything else on the like programming side, on the network slicing side is different. The reason that you're not seeing a difference is that, so we have sort of a data plane where we send our data, and we have a control plane, which is like the messages that we send to coordinate our device with the access point, with the server. There's a lot of messages has to be going through that control plane. Right now, the 5G that we have is called 5G not a standalone 5G, meaning that we are relying on 4G to send those control messages. So if your 4G is, let's say, slow, the control messages will be delayed, and that means that ultimately your 5G data transmissions will be delayed as well. So this is a still early deployment of 5G, so it's going to go through the standalone part in a few years. But right now, yes, I've been hearing this, I've been experiencing this a lot myself. Your second question, that's a very good one. So there is like government agencies like FCC that are responsible for answering questions like that. As scientists, well, we are aware of like some of the concerns, and we talk to the biology sides a lot. I also have a collaborator that looks into if I have like visible light communications, I have these lights on and they're flickering, right? How does this change like the pattern of like bees like moving and going back to their like home at the end? Like, how does that change, right? And there, for visible light, there are some evidence that it might change. Like, even if you are yourself are like looking at the screen, like a bright screen for a long time, you see like there's something wrong. You see some health concerns yourself, right? But there is no evidence of that for electric field. We know that in general, if magnetic field is strong, then that may cause some behavioral changes like migrations, right? But that's magnetic side. If you have, let's say, pacemaker or something like that, and it's advised that you're not being close to a magnetic field that often, or not being exposed to a strong magnetic field. But our signals, the magnetic power that we are sending is really, really small, right? Especially your smartphones. So yes, there's a lot of like theory, I don't know if you shall call it theory or not. There's a lot of things around this, but again, there is no evidence, scientific evidence, that sending EM waves, wireless signals is bad for your health.
We have a couple of questions from the Zoom, then we'll come back. And I'm going to actually combine them because it's related to your answer. One was about whether or not there would be a regulatory need to start changing things with 6G. Right. And then another one, you mentioned light technology. So someone's asked, if it is mature, why don't we have it now? And you touched on that a little bit in your answer about regulations.
Yes, the regulation is one thing. I mentioned the uplink side is not there yet, right? So you cannot use uplink visible light communication. The other thing is, well, the transmitter and receiver, the luminaries transmitter is there, right? That's there. But we still need to connect those to the internet, right? The way that we connect our router to the internet through wire, right? So we still need wires. We cannot get rid of wires, right? So that means that deployment cost is still there. And it's just a question that, do we want to invest on like putting so much money in this technology? Is it a good like replacement of maybe future millimeter wave terahertz, or we are just better off investing more on this lower frequency?
Thank you. TK?
My question, it's not on wireless, but on the wired communication you said in the beginning. The numbers, the error rate, it's 1 bit flip in 1 times 10 to, I think, 15 zeros.
Yeah.
Now, how did error happen? And can you prove it? I mean, is it measurable?
Yeah, it's measurable. The reason that can happen is basically as you send signal through wire, it interacts with the, like it's a conductor, right? So it might heat it up. So that heat might change the behavior of your EM signal a little bit. And 1 bit can flip like in every 10 to the power of 10 bit. It's very unlikely. You also make, I mean, sometimes the fiber is damaged or it's bended, or those things can also sometimes be error, but it's just the probability of that happening is really low.
Not clear what the reason of it. Why
Because of sometimes heating the conductor. So it's fiber is a conductor, right? So if you send bits, you're basically interacting with the electric field inside the fiber, you heat it up, and that might cause some error in it. So the error is kind of the same as like what causes error in the wireless medium, right? The interaction of these EM waves with air molecules, let's say, right? With different molecules that we have, with different surfaces, reflectors, right? That may kind of change the amplitude or frequency of your EM waves. The same thing happens inside fire, but at a very low probability. You can heat it up, and then the noise kind of make you flip 1 bit or make you retrieve 1 bit incorrectly.
So I think our last question is right here in the middle.
Hi, thank you so much. This talk was amazing. I have a question about kind of your role as a researcher and your connection with Ericsson, Huawei, all of these, like Qualcomm, all of these firms that are then tasked with taking this research and making it a reality. How does that relationship work? What are, I guess, your annoyances with that? What do you like about it? And what are your thoughts on that in general?
That's a very good question. So I get this a lot in like other panels as well. So as a scientist, you have the freedom of collaborating with whoever you want, companies, universities, right? It's really a choice that you have to make. There are a lot of IP issues that people sometimes are really concerned about. That's why they don't want to work with companies. But personally, I believe that as scientists, we should not worry about that. We should really be open and share. So that's why we, like as part of different centers, like there's a DARPA center I'm a part of. We collaborate with 10 different companies, all of the stakeholders. And so the vision is a little bit different. We're looking for like 10 years from now, 10 years plus. Like companies want to think about like, what should I write in my quarter report, right? Well, how should I show that this is going to give me, I don't know, bring more investment for the company and more profit for the company. So if you know how to adapt that mindset to your vision, it's going to work great. But if you don't want to end up like sacrificing your vision and your scientific freedom. So it's a balance to make. But I think as scientists, you really want to first understand the challenges in real deployment, in real practice. And you cannot do that unless you talk to people who are deploying it. And that's going to be companies. And they sometimes don't know what is going to be the next big things. Like they're so focused in, again, next quarter that they lose that big picture vision. So again, it's good for them to talk to us. So that should naturally have, there's like a lot of like centers, like NSF pushes for that, DARPA pushes. So there's a lot of push for that. But at the end of the day, it's really based on like your personal decision. How do you want to interact with them?
So I missed one. Our very last question is right there in the back. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for the lecture. It's really nice, really interesting. I had two questions. One was, so if, as you said, every 10 years we have a new G, right? 6G, 7G. About 100 years, how in 100 years, suppose you have, well, whatever G comes in 100 years, how does that affect the animal kingdom, like as a whole? I believe that the question was already asked, but like as a whole, like not only honeybees or migration, but
this is a very good question. Like we should not go far at like 100 years. Like if you, let's say we have people asking me, what do you think will be the next big thing in 10 years, 15 years from now? And look, nobody knows. If we knew it, we will be the next, I don't know, billionaires or multi-billion, because you can invest on that. But I think we have to trust the system in a way that just like from 1960s when first like radio was invented until today, we had regulations, we had people to like kind of put a cap on maximum power, put the cap on which frequencies you use, which frequencies don't use, right? The system will evolve. I think we have to trust it, and I don't see any reason that now that we have actually much more, I mean, we have a lot more to say about how these waves interact with like animals or human body than we had like 20, 30 years ago, right? So, I mean, my point is we can probably just make better decisions about the impact of that as we move forward compared to the previous decades, right? So I think, yeah, if you have an idea on what will be the next big things, we can talk about it offline. That's a great question.
So with that, I just wanted to say thank you so much for this. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you, everybody on Zoom. And we'll see you next Saturday for our next talk. Be warm and be safe, everybody.